Good to go. Hello. Okay, brilliant. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello, Malaga. My name is Edd Coates. I'm going to talk you through the principles of game UI UX, analysis and applications. This is a sort of program that I developed over the last 10 years to help teach people how to make great game UI. To really break it down, because a lot of people struggle with it. It's a really complex, multifaceted kind of medium. So yeah, this is a way of sort of basically like understanding it without getting sort of confused. So quick itinerary. So first of all, talk about myself, my website, the Game UI database. We're going to do a quick introduction to what Game UI actually is. We're going to talk about the principles of UI UX, the functional and flourish skills. Then we're going to talk about references, and then finally a quick Q&A. So first of all, hello, I'm Ed. I'm a game UI UX consultant, freelance, and I've worked on all sorts of games in my career. Worked on Golf with Your Friends 2, which is coming out this year. Worked on Ethereal by Silent Games. Southfield by Radical Forge. Call Me Under by Linares Games. Loco Motive by Robust Games. And Prison Architect 2, which still isn't out. I worked on that like 6 years ago, and it's still not out for some reason. And I'm also the creator of a website called the Game UI Database. Has anyone here used this website? Yay, oh, wonderful, brilliant. I'm in good company. So if you haven't used this website, it's basically a massive encyclopedia of references for game UI UX designers and game designers in general, really. So there's 74,000 screenshots and counting at the moment on there. All across different categories. So we've got title screens, credit screens, map screens, game over screens, you name it, essentially. And we've got different like art styles as well. So we've got flat, skeuomorphic, textured, different elements. So shapes, materials, elements, themes, controls, genres. So essentially, if you're looking for something really specific, like a title screen made out of wood or paper or something like that, we definitely have that on the database. 2 years ago, I launched Game UI Database 2.0, which brought in video and color tools and all sorts of crazy stuff. So my mission with the website was to create a standardized library of definitions and principles for categorization, because if we can find what we're looking for, then essentially it makes our job a lot easier and a lot quicker, because better categorization helps UI UX game designers find what they need in the shortest time possible. And it was very successful. It was in Forbes, Mashable, it was on Eurogamer, GamesIndustry.biz, Edge magazine, GameRant, 80 level rather. It was in China, Korea, Spain, all over the place. It won Best Tools Provider at the Mobile Game Awards 2021. I got a Guinness World Record a couple of years ago for collecting the most screenshots, which is the most niche Guinness World Record I could possibly imagine. But it's better than sitting in a bathtub full of beans, I suppose. It was so popular that it got scraped by OpenAI repeatedly until they basically killed the website for a couple of weeks. And that was in the news quite a bit. And yeah, the website is used by all of these studios, just to name but a few. Insomniac, Game Freak, Compulsion Games, Creative Assembly, all sorts. And coming very soon, I can say this now with absolute certainty, there's going to be a bit of a scoop here. I'm bringing out a book. So in collaboration with Lost in Cult, I'm bringing out the Game UI Bible, which is a 540-page book that celebrates game UI over the last 30 years. I've collaborated with Valve, Daniel Mullins Games, Player Research, Media Molecule, Santa Monica Studio. All these different studios have come together and contributed their expertise to bring this book to life. And I can say this is a world first. I can say that it's coming out on July the 23rd. So very, very soon. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So first of all, how do we define game UI? What is it? How do we define what it actually is? So I like to define it by 3 pillars. First of all, it's how we interact with the game. So a really easy way of looking at this is just menus, menu systems. So if you're like an inventory or something, if you're looking at inventory, you're using the controller to interact with that menu. That's interaction. It's how we receive context, instruction, and guidance. So if you're looking at something, it's how the game gives information to you as a player. So a really good example of that is, of course, the HUD. So if you've got like a health bar, a boss bar, or collection counters, and ammo, all that kind of stuff. That's information that the game is giving you in response to the controls that you are giving it. So it's like a continuous cycle. We'll get that in a minute. And it's also your visual identity and branding, of course. So there is a connection between UI and branding. Sometimes there isn't, but it works really, really well. In like Animal Crossing here, for example, we can see the UI is actually being used in the trailers. So there's a really strong connection with branding as well. So game UI is interaction plus information plus art. And as I mentioned a second ago, the first two there, they create this cycle, interaction, information. You interact with the game, and it gives you information in response. So here, for example, in like Final Fantasy VII, you control the game, and then you get the damage counters and all that kind of thing. That's this sort of continuous two-way conversation between the game and the player. And that's what UI UX really is. It's about this conversation between the game and the player. So taking that into account, there are all sorts of ways we can do that. It's not just what we know as UI, it's just buttons and menus and all that kind of stuff. It's audio and icons and accessibility, game fields, tutorialization, navigation, game flow, all that kind of stuff. Juice, all these kind of things that make the UI sort of give the information to the player, essentially. And there's so many ways of doing that. So yeah, game UI is a lot. It's a lot to take in, and this is why so many people get confused. They look at things online, and they look at Call of Duty, and they think, oh my god, my work's not going to be that good ever. How do they get to that point? But there are so many little steps that we have to take to get to that point, and that's what I'm hopefully going to go through and hopefully help you with today. So introducing my principles of UI. There are 8 principles. First of all, there's layout, flow and navigation, iconography, typography, contrast, and then you'll see why there's a little separation in a minute, shape and pattern, material and texture, and finally, color. So the reason why there are 2 groups here is because I like to separate them. So we have functional principles on the left, and then we have flourish principles on the right. So essentially, your functional principles are required for a functional interface. They're the ones that they tie more into UX than UI, but there is still some overlap. Whereas flourish is there, it's purely for aesthetic. It's there to kind of bring the game into the lore of the world and to make it look pretty and to make it work with the branding and all that kind of stuff. So this is required for an attractive interface. So first of all, we're going to go through our functional skills. So layout, number 1. So this is the arrangement of visual elements on the screen. Layout is probably the hardest thing to teach to people because it's one of these, there's so much involved in just layout in general. There's spacing and there's the actual UX of it and all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna go through a few different things that we have to kind of learn to get used to this. So first of all, learn to recognize the building blocks of game UI. So UI is kind of made of these it's very modular. It's made of these building blocks when you think of it like that. So if you look at something like a health bar, it's there to solve a problem. It's there to solve the problem of how do we communicate to the player how much health they have. Really, really simple. And these solutions, they're known as design patterns. So there's so many design patterns throughout the history of games that you can probably think of, and we basically reuse them because the player expects them, and therefore we don't have to teach them to them again. So we won't have to teach the player what a health bar is every time, for example. So bringing this now into sort of the menu space, if we look at pause screens, there are quite a few design patterns going on here. So the function of actually pausing is obviously a design pattern in itself. But if you look at the layout of all these different screens, they all have something very much in common. They've got a vertical list of options. Some of them say the word paused. Some of them are in a box. There are all these different kinds of things. So if you wanted to make a pause menu, it's really as simple as just looking at the structure of all these different things and copying that structure in your wireframe, and there you have a bog standard, really simple pause menu. It doesn't look great, but it's functional, and that's the thing we're trying to get across with this part of the talk. Taking this now a little step further, so loadout screens. Again, you can see the similarities between these different screens. They all have a model in the middle or to the side. They all have slots for your equipment. Some of the slots are square, some are in a vertical list. So again, you can see these similarities, and there's quite a few sort of design patterns, repeated things going on here. And I took that for Ethereal, where basically we have this sort of character in the middle, and then we have the slots on the left and the stats on the right. I think it was vaguely based on Demon Souls. So yeah, you can see how like if you basically look for these kind of similarities between all these different screens, then you can copy them and use them in your own work. So learn to identify the building blocks. Don't look at a screen of UI as like all the colors and the icons and so. Try to sort of look at it through a lens of just scribbles and blocks and big shapes and the wider kind of stuff. Like that's how you start essentially, and then you build that out into a more complex wireframe. So look for similarities across different games and use them in your work. Number 2, ensure your layouts are balanced. So another thing, spacing, padding. It's a really difficult thing to teach, but I'll try my best with this. It goes into a lot. Ensure that they're vertically and horizontally balanced. So if I was to add these kind of margins to it, for example, you can see that the margins at the top and the bottom are equal. So it's balanced. Like if I was to flip that upside down, it would look just as balanced as it does here. Same with left and right. You've got an equal amount of balance on the left and right. Again, it feels right. You have to watch for weight with words as well, because if you have like a word where there's like a little bit hanging above and all that kind of stuff, like we don't count that as part of the weight. We count the sort of the heaviest part of the word. So it would be this bit here. And you can also use grids as well. So in terms of like going back to where we have the where I was like drawing the big outlines and all that kind of stuff. If you think of that in terms of like when you're drawing on a grid, like plot out the big spaces on your grid first of all, and then like fill them in with the details. So grids are really good for that as well, for like plotting things out and balancing things vertically and horizontally as well. So yeah, as I said, like a good tip is to actually like flip them upside down and back to front. Because you can see like it still feels horizontally and vertically balanced if you do that. So it's a really good way of sort of checking your UI. Number 3, remember that your game UI is dynamic. So game UI isn't just like a static screen. It changes. There are so many different states that you're going to have to think about when you're creating it. And again, a good example of that is the HUD. So you've got like your sort of fight, KO, that kind of stuff. And you've got dialogue boxes, and you've got your health bars. You've got to think about like, what does the health bar look like when it's full? What does it look like when it's like at a quarter? Does it get red? Does it change color or change shape or anything like that? You need to think about all of this stuff when you're creating your HUDs. Design for best and worst case layout scenarios. So as I was saying like a minute ago, like with the health bars and things, like thinking about how those different states work. Same goes for menus. So how does a menu look when it's full? For example, do we add a scroll bar to it? Is the player able to like scroll down just by pressing the D-pad? You've got to think about all of this stuff as well. Short text versus long text. So what happens to, if you've got like a modal window, for example, what happens to the window when it gets full? Do you add a scroll bar to it? Does the box expand? Does it have like a limit to how much text you can put in there? And also, you've got to think about translations as well. So moving to different languages. German's like a really tricky one sometimes, because it can actually make things a lot longer than English, as a lot of English UI designers have found in the past. So you have to like account for that with your panels as well. Like, do the panels get bigger? Is there a limit to how much you can put in there? You have to think about all of that stuff as well. So principle number 2, flow and navigation. The scaffold of the interface. So think about how the player navigates from screen to screen. So we've talked about layout and the actual design of the screens. And then we're going to talk about screen flow, how players get from one screen to another. So looking at Smash Brothers as an example, this is a really simple screen flow for going through a game. So you select the character. Then from the character, you select a stage. That goes to this versus screen that shows you all the players that are now in the match. Then you go to the match itself. When the match finishes, you go to the victory screen. Really, really simple flow. It's very, very linear. But what happens when you want to show like multiple options? This is where we have hub menus. So hub menus are essentially just menus with lots of different options that can go in different ways. So rather than like a linear pathway from screen A to screen B, or D or whatever, that gives you multiple options and you can go in multiple different directions. So hub menus can be done in all sorts of different ways. So we've got this very simple thing where you have like a list or tiles or big, beautiful options like that, that kind of thing. You can have horizontally tabbed menus. So like these are used quite a lot in setting screens, for example, so you can like switch between the different like display, audio, gameplay, all that kind of thing. You can have vertically tabbed menus. So again, these work exactly the same as the other ones, only you don't use the shoulder buttons to kind of like go through them. It's usually like a two-step process, so you would go up and down on the D-pad, press A, and then move to this panel here. So that's stuff you have to consider as well. And then there's hybrid menus, which basically take like a combination of what's come before, where you can have like, so Planet Coaster here, for example, has the tab system at the top. Then it also has a tile, so like a hub kind of system down here. So each tab would have its own hub, essentially. And before you even start making your UI, you have to think about like, how do we map this out? How do we plan this kind of stuff? So create a flow diagram. Miro is a really good tool for this. I use Miro. So yeah, if like this, for example, is a tab system, so main menu, character, codec, settings, and then if you go down to like character, there's like an option here for body type, hair, that kind of thing. So this is all really important to plan when you're making your UI. Okay, number 2, consider how the player will control the interface. Okay, this is thing loads of people get wrong. The controls are so important. They are the first thing you should be looking at when you're creating UI. They are the first thing because they determine so much of what your actual design is. It's so important. So a good example of this, if we go back to Planet Coaster, on the PC when it first launched, we had these like panels here. We've got tabbing systems. We've got these vertical systems here. It's all really good, but then you also have tabs down here, and you've got all these different things going on. It's really, really cool. So imagine you've created this UI for mouse and keyboard. It works great. It's fantastic. And then someone comes along and says, right, now we're going to release it on Xbox. What do we do? How do we control this with a controller? There is no way. So what usually happens is we then have to create the entire thing from scratch for console. And that is what they had to do when they brought Planet Coaster to console. That's what they had to do. They had to create an entire new UI. And this is the exact same screen as this, but for the console version. So essentially, they're having to do like 2 lots of work, which isn't the most efficient thing to do. And interestingly, when Planet Coaster 2 came out and it launched simultaneously for PC and console, they took this into account from the start, and they actually had the console version work flawlessly with gamepad from the start, and same with the PC version. So, for a cross-platform interface, design for gamepad first. That's a really important thing to remember. I built a tool called PadCrafter. Has anyone here used PadCrafter? No? OK. So there's a link on the database for this. So if you go to so if you click on the little PadCrafter link, essentially you can craft your own control schemes. And it's got mouse and keyboard support now as well, so you can create these sort of like gamepad first, mouse and keyboard compatible control schemes for use when you're making your UI. Third principle, iconography. This is the design language and the meaning of your icons. So first of all, ensure that your icon designs are consistent. Do the stroke widths match up? This is a really simple one to look at. Like a lot of people when they're making icons, they tend to sort of like, it's really hard to get that consistency, but a really easy way of getting it is just to look at the stroke widths. So you can see here, for example, like this is thicker than this. Negative space is also considered a stroke, so that there is less thick than that, and that's thinner, so it's not good. But just unifying the strokes is a really, really simple way of making sure that it's consistent across the board. Look at shape language. So another really easy way of doing consistency is just to set some simple rules for your icons. So are they chunky? Do they have straight, jagged edges? Are they rounded? Are they wobbly? You know, all these kinds of things. And then just stick into those rules throughout the design. It is a really simple way of doing that. Number 2, know when to use aesthetic or functional icons. So this is another thing that a lot of people get wrong sometimes. They put so much effort into ensuring that every icon makes sense, and they probably overthink it a wee bit. But if you're looking at stuff like a skill tree, so taking Donkey Kong Bonanza here, for example, so this one is currently selected. Does that say spin slam to you? If you were to look at that, and you wouldn't go, oh, yeah, that's a spin slam. No, it doesn't actually matter really what the icons are in this instance because they're aesthetic. They're there just to make the screen look pretty. But this bit here is the important bit because it tells you exactly what you're looking at. So it's interesting. You don't have to focus on readability for like every single icon, and you have to identify which ones are aesthetic and which are important to navigation. Like these ones. So on the title screen of Donkey Kong Bonanza, we have these icons here. There's no label for them, and if you didn't know what those meant, you'd actually be a bit sort of stuck. But we know this means settings because it's a design pattern. We know that's a very, it's something that we see in like every game. We know that probably means help because there's a question mark. That's probably some sort of list menu. We don't like. I think it's achievements or something. Oh no, it's news. I got confused there for a sec. We know that's an amiibo. So yeah, learning the difference between functional and aesthetic icons is also really important. But yeah, when in doubt, ask a friend to guess the meaning. So basically just create your functional icon, show your friend, be like, what do you think this means? And if they say, well, it's a spin slam, obviously, then you've got it right. Number 3, keep your icons simple. So another thing that a lot of people do is they make things really literal. So say you're asked to make a potion that sends the player home, for example. They might put like a home inside a potion or a potion inside a home, or they put like a little home next to a potion or something like that. But again, it doesn't really matter what it says because you've got the UI that tells you what it does. So looking at these games here, for example, in Dark Souls, you've got the Homeward Bone. In World of Warcraft, you've got the Hearthstone. In this game, it's got the Potion of Return. So it really doesn't matter like what the design is. This is just like a generic potion. It really doesn't matter. For stuff like this, it's way more important that the UI communicates what it is to the player rather than the icon. And the fourth one, another thing that a lot of people get wrong, ensure that your icons are clear and readable at all sizes. So avoid unnecessary details. A big mistake that a lot of people make is they design their icons really big and they shrink them down. Don't do that. Please don't do that, because you end up with all of this unnecessary noise, like all of this detail here. At a distance, you can't really read that very well, but if you were to just simplify it, get rid of all the extra stuff, and just make sure that it reads simple at small size. So if you design it while it's small, you're going to be less tempted to add all this detail. And that's what we want, something really simple. As long as it sort of abides by your design rules, it's completely fine. Principle number 4, typography. The effectiveness of your fonts and text. So fonts should convey an appropriate level of personality, obviously. So, different fonts change the tone of your words. So if you're creating like a horror game or something like that, you don't want to use like Comic Sans or or something really, really like sort of rounded and friendly like that. You want to be using something that has a bit more spookiness to it, A really good tip that I've got for fonts is to essentially create like a line of text that represents the genre that you're going for. So for example, if you're making a horror game, The Nightmare Begins, and then in your head, read out what it would sound like in that font. I know it sounds a bit strange, but this one might sound a bit more formal, so like The Nightmare Begins, kind of thing. Whereas this one is bold, so it's maybe a little bit louder, like The Nightmare Begins, So like read it out in your head, and that's a really good way of sort of like gauging the tone of the font that you're choosing. And is the voice loud, happy, sad, solemn, well-spoken, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a really good way of choosing your fonts. Body fonts should be clear and legible. This is an obvious one. Obviously, we want people to actually be able to read out text. So another thing that a lot of people do is they really overthink body text because they think like, okay, so the body text has to fit in with the game. So we want it to be like really, you know, stylistic, and it needs to fit in with the genre and all that kind of stuff. But it's just not. It's not necessary. Like one, because it's not readable. Like if you look at this, for example, we've got this Art Deco kind of border. I've got Art Deco for the title. That's great. You can read that fine. But when you look at the body text, it's really difficult to read at a distance. And just making it something really, really simple, like this doesn't necessarily fit with the rest of the UI, but that does not matter. And as always, we can look at other games for like evidence of this, like Pokemon Arceus Legends. They have this kind of like this kind of really cool kind of paintbrush kind of effect for the font here. But then look at the body text; it's just a basic sans serif. Like there's nothing going on with that at all. But it doesn't matter. You don't notice it and think, oh, that doesn't fit, because the most important thing with this kind of text is that you can read it. Metal Hellsinger is another game that has the same thing. So like all the tabs and like these single word kind of fonts and these titles all have this kind of gothic kind of thing going on. And then the body text doesn't have any kind of serifs or anything at all. It's just a really simple sans serif font. So it honestly doesn't matter at all. Learn how to mix and match fonts appropriately. This is another thing a lot of people struggle with. But a really simple tip that I use a lot and I tell people to do is just pair a serif with a sans serif for an easy font combo. So if you've got like a serif font for your header, just make the body a sans serif. And that will work for more situations than you'd be very surprised. But you can also try a font family for a collection of instantly compatible fonts as well. So if you've got like a font family that has like headers and subheaders and bodies and all that kind of stuff, they will work out the box completely fine. There's also a website called fontpair.co. So this has lots of different suggestions for combinations as well. So yeah, it's really not as hard as a lot of people think it is. Number 4, ensure there's a clear and consistent sense of hierarchy. So again, hierarchy is another thing that a lot of people struggle with, but mainly because they put too much, they put way too many kind of font sizes into it. There's like no consistency there at all, and it all feels a bit lopsided. So really obvious thing, big equals important, small equals less important. Very, very simple concept. But you need to establish rules. So if you've used sort of like font 22 pixel size or whatever for your header, for header 1, then you need to use that throughout your entire game. You need to keep these rules consistent throughout your entire game so it makes sense. And it doesn't just feel like a different part of the UI, like a different UI. Yeah, apply these rules across your game. So Sonic Forces does a wonderful job of this. The only sort of exception for this is where there might be text that's like a little bit too big or a little bit too small. It's okay to change it slightly, but as long as you've used those rules kind of like mostly throughout your entire game, it will be completely fine. Principle number 5, contrast. This is a fun one. The clarity and accessibility of your interface. So use contrast to guide the player's eye. So again, this is something that a lot of people really struggle with, mainly because a lot of people don't like to wireframe. A lot of people really hate the wireframing process. They find it boring. But I've learned to really love the wireframing process over the years because it just makes things so much easier, and you'll see why in a minute. So more contrast equals more visibility. So less contrast, the text sort of fades into the background. More contrast, with the text being more contrasty against the background, it pops out and the eye is automatically drawn towards it. So this is a really powerful way of basically grabbing the player's attention and making them look at something on the screen that you want them to look at. But if you use too much contrast, if you use that everywhere, then essentially the player's not going to be looking at anything in particular because there's nothing standing out. If everything's standing out, then nothing's standing out. So if you look at this screen here, I've literally just used like white for the background here, white for the scroll bar, white for it looks fine, but your eye doesn't quite know where to rest, you know? So just by taking back the contrast on some things, now your eye is drawn to the most important bits of this interface. So your eye is drawn to the title, then it's drawn to the active tab, because obviously if you have a tabbing system, you want to know which page you're on. And then you have the navigation cursor for the gamepad and a scroll bar and the header there. So essentially, we want to bring stuff back to push things forwards. Ensure that text is readable. So again, going back to typography, where the readability of the text is incredibly important for accessibility. Poor contrast is also poor accessibility. So if you have a background here, like a piece of paper, and you have some text on top of it, if you've done nothing to that paper, the chances are you're not going to be able to read that text. It's just going to blend into the background. And if we look at sort of this diagram here, referring to the old one, that's essentially what you're doing. You're kind of you've got these kind of light bits that are competing with the bit you actually want to see. And it's just really confusing to look at. Whereas if you've got a nice sort of controlled background with lots of different shades, but still in the same sort of ballpark of grayness, the text will pop out and you'll be able to see it completely clearly. So it's a really simple, so in this case, it's really simple. All I did was just add an overlay over the paper to manage that contrast, to flatten it down, darken the entire thing, and as you can see now, the text is completely readable. So you can see the difference here, this is unmanaged contrast, really, really all over the place. You don't know where you want to look, kind of thing, and here, lovely, readable text. Number 3, account for backdrops with dynamic brightness. So the HUD is a really tricky one, because obviously, like a piece of paper, you can put an overlay on that and be done. But a HUD, gameplay changes all the time. You've got daylight, day and night cycles. You've got sort of caves and bright lights and all that kind of stuff. So making sure that the HUD is visible at all times can sometimes be a real struggle. So you can see here, it's this icon here looks fine during the day, looks great at night. During the daytime, you can only really see sort of half of it because it blends in with a cloud, which is not what we want. So one thing you can do is add a stroke to it. So this works as sort of a buffer around the icon. So it's not important that we see the white bit. That blends in with the background, but the icon itself is protected. So we can see the icon perfectly fine, regardless of what the background's doing. We can add a drop shadow. But be warned, this only works on light assets, so it looks a little bit weird on a dark asset. If you're on a dark asset, you can add a colored background, but sometimes that makes it look a bit like it's glowing, so it's not always the best thing you can do, but it's something you can do. Or you can put it in a container, so a bit like the stroke, you can put it basically in a box or a circle or something like that. When you see HUDs, existing games out there where they've got icons in circles or boxes, that's usually why they've done it, not to look good. They've done it to preserve the contrast of that icon, which is really interesting. And this game here, I can't remember the name of it, Onion Knight, I think. So you can see what they've done here. They've got a black box around the health bar here. If that black box wasn't there, you wouldn't be able to see these at all. Yeah, you can see that this is perfectly visible regardless of what's going on in the game. You can also paint vignettes to rein in dynamic contrast. So if you really want the UI, your HUD to pop out, if you really want bits of the UI to pop out, you can literally just go into Photoshop and just paint around the outside of the screen, and that will bring things out. It will make them pop out. That's my favorite way of doing it, because it makes things look a little bit cinematic as well. Won't work for every game, but it works for a lot of games, and it looks really, really cool. Number 4, use functional contrast to assist with navigation. So again, the cursor for the gamepad, moving it up and down. This is a really important part of the whole user experience, obviously, because you need to know where you're looking at. And there are all kinds of different ways of doing that. So, Monster Hunter sort of colors in the panel. Anarchy Reigns does a sort of background on the active item there. You can change the color of the text. You can add a little side thing there. There are all kinds of different ways of doing this. But this is something that you need to factor in when you're creating your wireframes, because it's an important part of the contrast. You can also use a cursor, so Final Fantasy games, for example, use the little hand thing. You can use a little arrow. You can put a red line around it, all these different ways of doing it. You can also do something called emphasis by de-emphasis. So rather than making something jump out, you can basically pull everything back. So here, for example, this looks locked, this looks like it's not selected, and this looks selected. And I haven't really, I've put a stroke around it, but actually you don't even need that because these things here are kind of telling you everything you need to know. That's brighter than those, so we know that that's the selected item. And you can also contrast with scale as well. There are all kinds of different ways of contrasting, like making, but like this is like a really, it's a quick stop tour of contrast, essentially. So scale is like another way of doing it. So the result, when you put these 5 principles together, you mix them in a pot, you get wireframes, lovely wireframes. So when I create wireframes, they should look, I try to make them look as finished as possible, but basically in grayscale. So I really go all in on like the patterns and the shapes and all that kind of stuff. My wireframes are not simple. So I try to do 90% of the work like in this stage. You don't have to do that, but I find it really useful. So when you're creating wireframes, no color, only grayscale. But you can use color for screenshot elements. So for example, not like HUD screenshots, you should really turn them into grayscale so you can work in grayscale. But if you've got something like a character model or something like that, or you've got like icons you've already made for items and stuff like that, you can still keep those as color. It doesn't really matter too much. No texture or rasters, design in vector. So obviously like raster is annoying because if you delete something, you can't really get it back unless you undo. Illustrator, XD, and Figma are really good for like creating non-destructive designs, essentially. Focus only on usability, so ensure that every element is clear and readable. Only use shapes, fonts, lines, and gradients, but try to get it looking as close to perfect as possible. Okay, now artistic skills. I need to speed up a bit. Ooh. Shape and pattern. Shape and pattern can change the tone, era, and setting of the entire game. So this is really exciting. So Art Deco, for example, implies 1920s, 30s period luxury elegance. So geometric lines, pillars, arches, fans, all this kind of stuff. We see that in Strange Brigade. Strange Brigade doesn't actually tell you explicitly that it's set in the 1920s, but it's really cool that it uses the UI to kind of like communicate this to the player simply by adding these little bits of Art Deco to the borders. Dune Space Wars, this is using a sort of spin-off of Art Deco called Art Nouveau, which is used in a lot like space opera kind of stuff, so really appropriate for Dune. Tribal, so we've got diamonds, triangles, and pyramids, snaking lines, waves, all this kind of stuff implies adventure, tropical locations, ruins, ancient civilizations, Indiana Jones, that kind of stuff. So we see this in Pokemon Snap. So before you've even played the game, you've got the photo decks that has these kind of like tribal patterns all over them. And you can tell, like, oh, we're probably gonna go to some caves and tropical locations and temples and stuff like that. So it's a really good way of like indicating to the player like what they're in for as well. Sonic Frontiers is a surprising one. They use it in a really subtle way. They've got these triangles in the background here. Believe it or not, these mean something. These are relevant because in the game it's set in like an ancient civilization, and you've got like temples and ruins and stuff like that. So that's really, really cool. And even going way back to Yoshi's Island, they've got the triangles on the outsides there. And of course, Yoshi's Island is set on a tropical location, so it's really, really cool. Blueprint implies building, exploration, technology, and investigation. So we've got folder notches, grids, schematics, folder frames, that kind of stuff. We see this a lot in level editors. So Angry Birds VR, for example, uses like a blueprint grid on the background because it's a level editor. You're creating levels. So it makes a lot of sense. Lines of P, again, so Geppetto has created like Pinocchio, and he's like an inventor and all that kind of stuff. So they've used blueprint patterns to kind of like hark back to that, which is really, really cool. Tocom Fighting Souls, they've used blueprints here to look like the sort of the drafts, like when you're creating like comic books, the comic book sort of schematics. So that's really awesome. Nordic and Celtic implies Vikings, Norse mythology, and fantasy themes. You can probably guess what game's coming up next. Forks, Celtic knots, runes, 8-point stars, all that kind of stuff. And of course, we see that a lot in God of War. So God of War has these 8-point stars on the kind of runic borders on the skill tree over here, the forks even. And then we have like, you can't really see it very well, but there's some sort of like runes here. So they use that obviously because the game's set in like a Nordic mythology kind of world. Skyrim, there's no overt kind of like Celtic or Nordic kind of stuff going on in the game, but we see a lot of Celtic stuff going on in like fantasy games. So of course they've used it here in the borders here. They've got these Celtic knots here, which is really, really cool. Brutal Legend is probably my favorite use of Celtic knots in any game because they've done this thing here. It's a fantasy world, but they've created like a sort of a rock version of the Celtic knot, which is so cool. It's really, really cool. So shape and pattern can be applied in different ways. You can use it as a background tile, so you can just create something, reduce the contrast, obviously, and make that your background. Or you can apply it to borders and corners. So little things here. There are all kinds of different ways of just using it in your interface. If you've got like a panel or something like that, just a box, it's a gift for any designer because like, oh, what can we do with this panel? It's really, really cool. You can also experiment with shapes as well. So if you want to make that panel like all wobbly or whatever, that's something you can do. You can make it sort of wonky and skewed, and that's really good for like comic books and that kind of thing. So there's all different ways that you can experiment with shapes and patterns and things to really build out your world. Material and texture can introduce some physicality into your game. So examples, paper, really, I don't have to explain paper to you, I'm sure. So Tunic uses it really well. He actually created like a booklet out of real paper and scanned it in. He put it into the dishwasher, actually, to make it look a bit aged, and then scanned it in. And that's how he created the manual for Tunic, which is really, really cool. There we go. Silent Hill F, again, they've got this kind of like journal thing here. It's a really personal way of sort of adding a little personal touch like to the character's journey. Echo the Oracle Skull, so even in like a pixel art game, you can use like the sort of outlines to indicate that you're looking at paper. Brushstrokes for creative graffiti-inspired and historical UI. So brushstrokes here, you've got like outlines where you can basically just cut notches in, or you can use a brush. So Red Dead Redemption 2 is a really good example of this for like historic UI, where they've used like these brushstrokes on the outsides here. Again, like notice like these are like what they've done with these panels. Like you got a panel, you can do so much cool stuff with it just to make it fit with your world. Mario Strikers Battle League, so again, they've got these kind of like cut notches into these options here, which is really, really cool. The World Ends with You Neo, again, they've used like paint graffiti because it's like a sort of punk kind of thing. And Scanline and Grid, which is like the easiest way of making a game look like it belongs in like a futuristic kind of world. You literally just get some horizontal lines and put it over your UI, and voila, it's a screen. It's really, really simple. So Pikmin did that. Fallout, again, just having like a grid of lines, like a sort of grid, it's suddenly a screen. Like, you're not fooling me, that's a flat UI, you're not fooling me. And the really cool thing is you can basically combine pattern and texture to alter the tone of the game completely. So you can do something like this. You've got like a tribal pattern, and you've got like distress, and it's on a bit of paper, so it looks like it's been stamped. That's really cool. Or you could do this thing like a sort of Nordic, Celtic superhero kind of thing. You've got like halftone in the background and splodges of grunge. It looks a bit sort of gritty. We've got like Metroid here. They've done this they've got the tribal patterns in the background, and then they've got those cheeky horizontal lines there, making it look very like a screen, which is really cool. So you've got this futuristic, ancient technology kind of stuff. Art Deco architecture, so we've got metal with like Art Deco, and it creates this sort of like really physical looking UI, which the Civilization series is really known for. So the tiniest of changes can change the narrative completely. So you've got a luxury cruise ship, for example. You've got this panel here, it's got like Art Deco borders, looks really cool. But what if we wanted to make the ship look a little bit weathered and worn? So we'll add some distress to it. And now it becomes an abandoned luxury cruise ship. So you've got these bits of distress here. Looks like it's a little bit weathered. But, oh no, a cult has taken over the ship. What do we do? So now it's an abandoned cultist luxury cruise ship. And we can go even a step further from that and just plunge it into hell. Just plunge it into hell. So there we go. An abandoned cultist luxury cruise ship from hell. So we've got here Art Deco for elegance, grunge brush for decay, rune patterns for the occult, and splats of blood to make it look really friendly. So, and finally, color. I've got speed run this one. Identify your accent color. So, yeah, again, I'm going to try and break this down because color, to be honest with you, was the thing that I struggled with for the longest time, and I think a lot of people struggle with. So I'm going to try and break this down as sort of objectively as possible for you. Hopefully, this is a really helpful way of looking at it. So first of all, your accent colors, going back to contrast and your navigation pointer and all that kind of stuff. Typically, this is using an accent color. So we've got like here, for example, you've got like the bright yellow. This has sort of like a teal kind of thing going on. There's like a blue there kind of thing. And these colors can also tie really heavily into the branding of your game. Because they're like, they don't necessarily have to be used like everywhere, but they're used in a really important way. So again, because your eye is drawn to these bits here, you associate red with Persona 5, or Persona 5 with red, you know? That's the color, but it's not actually used like everywhere. It's just in these little bits here. So it's really interesting. So remember, we don't want this. We want this. We want to use about 5 or 6 kind of like shades of gray to kind of like draw the player's eye. And then it's as simple as replacing the white with an accent. And suddenly, you've got an accent. It looks fine. It looks better than in gray, but we can do better, obviously. So let's show different ways of doing it. So we've got like, yeah, you can basically just replace the color. We can use 2 accents. So we could like have yellow as the thing, and then use that as the kind of teal kind of thing. So again, it looks way, way better already. And there's different things you can do there. We can use 3 accents. We can do a tertiary thing, so you can basically like take 3 points on the color wheel and use those colors. And again, all I've done here is just replace the highest contrast bits of your wireframe with some color, and it starts to look like it starts to come alive like really quickly. So there you go, some more examples. So, and to add color to the rest of the UI now is as simple as just replacing the contrasted grayscale with color, like a gradient of color. So you take your ramp of grayscale here, and you just replace it with a color. Just replacing, so dark becomes dark purple or dark red or whatever. Light gray becomes light red, whatever. So you've just got to respect the same contrast as the original, and boom. Like, it's a really, really simple way of just adding some color to your UI. Same with red, same with blue, and the 2 accents. Same with purple. And it will work for any combination of colors, essentially, as long as your contrast is respected. So you can even sort of like dip into some purple here. As long as you've got this ramp of color going darker to lighter, on that kind of matches the original wireframe, you'll be completely fine. So essentially, yeah, a lot of people will talk about color theory, but it's actually the theory of contrast. It's not just about color, it's about contrast. That's the most important bit of color. And if you're having trouble checking your contrast, you can also use grayscale to like sort of to flip it back to grayscale, and you can check it there. So if that's darker than that, then you know that's not going to work. So yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? We've got 8 principles here: layout, flow and navigation, iconography, typography, contrast, shape and pattern, general texture, color. There's a lot to remember. And when I was on my own personal sort of UI journey, I like to look at it as like a series of skill trees, specifically the Skyrim skill trees. So you've got these kind of like, in the same way you've got like shooting and attack and all that kind of stuff. You've got iconography, texture, pattern, and they've all got their own sort of little skill sets. And you know, you're not trying to be better at UI. You're trying to identify what you're good at and what you're not good at, and then trying to work on the stuff you're not good at. And then when it comes to like really shouting about yourself. Like if you've got like a portfolio piece or even like an art test or something like that, you pull into the stuff that you know you're good at because that's like your safety skills. So it's really important to identify your strengths and weaknesses. And we get to this point literally by studying existing screenshots. This is why references are so important to us as designers. So, and funny enough, why the database has been good for me as a designer, because it's allowed me to analyze so many different games across, across the history of games. So I've been able to sort of like really break these things down. So, like, I'll look at this and I'll see tabs and I'll see tribal patterns and a list menu and icons and a scroll bar and I'll see some drop shadows there and all these kind of things. And just being able to focus on a screen and really break it down into its core components, that's how you become a better designer. So you have to ask the right questions. You learn to dissect and analyze references by looking at their by their principles, by basically asking the right questions, looking at these screens. So what are the basic building blocks? If you were to look at this, how do you break it down into just basic shapes, not details, just basic blocks and shapes? How do you navigate from screen to screen? So how do we get from one screen to another? Is it a linear path, or is there a menu system that goes to multiple different options? What rules are being used in the iconography? So are we using like, are we trying to do functional or flourish with the icons? Yep, which icons are functional and which are aesthetic? Are functional icons intuitive or labeled? So for the navigation icons, the really important ones, is there a label there that tells you what they are, or is it just obvious? Which fonts are used and how they're used to create hierarchy? So like which fonts have they used in the game, like where are they used and all that kind of thing? How is functional contrast being used to assist the player? Have they got like a little icon there indicating where the player is looking? Have they used like a really bright sort of thing to kind of show you? Is the game using shape as a contrast tool? So have they used shape to kind of like show you which things are different? So like the arrow there, like is it pointing to the thing you've selected? How is the UI accounting for worst-case contrast scenarios? So Mario here, for example, has put like an outline on the text. I've done that here with my boyfriend. Everyone say hi, Matt. Yeah. I won some boyfriend points for that. Thank you. So I've put an outline around Matt, and you can see that you can actually see him in the screenshot. Which patterns are being repeated throughout the UI? So we've got these kind of like jagged shapes here to make it look all wacky and cool. What shape language is being used? So are we using like sort of rounded things? Are we using jagged things? Are we using both? Is there a reason for using both? Are there any patterns in the backdrop? So again, in Mario Wonder, you've got this sort of like pixel art kind of thing, which is really cool and obviously appropriate because it's Mario. Are there any patterns hidden in buttons or headings? So they've done like halftone here. Again, halftone is very much associated with like comic books and all that kind of stuff, which is appropriate for Mario. Are the elements flat or do they have form? So these are, in like the rest of the UI is flat, but these actually do have form. They're a little bit 3D. How are shadows and strokes used to give form? So here, this is like flat, but they've also used a sort of like, the way they've used the drop shadow, it's like it's flat, but it's 3D, which is really, really cool. Is the game using a dynamic palette? Are there like different colors, and are they used in all kinds of different ways? Where have accent colors being used? So in Mario, the most sort of like visible color is yellow, because it's the accent used everywhere. Is there any relevance to the accent colors? So I've got like red, blue. I'm not sure if there's relevance to, oh, okay, cool, yeah. So essentially, you want to look at loads of different games, analyze them, and then iterate on the stuff they've done, learn from those games, and basically invent new stuff. So take all these things, break them apart, mix and match things, and create something brand new. And most importantly, have fun, because UI is meant to be fun. You can find out more about Game UI UX at gameuidatabase.com. Thank you so much. Thank you. Is there time for a Q&A? There's probably no time, is there?
I think we don't have any time.
No, it's okay.
It's already...
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, there's no diagram.
for questions.
Oh, it's okay. I'm sorry. I did.